Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Peggy Lutz. It's January 29th, 2019, and we're here talking about World War II era at Linfield College. Thank you so much for coming and joining with us, or not coming. Thank you so much for being with us today, Peggy.
This is fun. This is great.
Good, excellent. I want to start a little bit about with your background, where you were born, grew up, and how you ended up at Linfield.
I was born in Portland, and I grew up in over on the coast after the age of 15, and my family moved over to what is now Lincoln City, and that was where I was based, I guess you'd say, the rest of my life, but while I was single. But my family is a Linfield family, and that's how I got to Linfield College. My mother graduated from Linfield in 1905, and she graduated in a class for stenographic class for jury reporting or legal reporting, court reporting, and I think it was a 1-year class or maybe a year and a half, but I have her diploma from way back there. Then my oldest brother graduated in 1932 from Linfield and became a teacher. My other brother, who graduated in 1937, he graduated in 1938, and I graduated from high school in 1938. But I couldn't go to college because we couldn't afford it. The tuition was $300 a year, and my family did not have the money. So my second brother was another teacher. He had a job teaching in Eastern Oregon, and he earned enough to start me in 39. So he paid my way the first year in 39. And then a relative picked up on it and put me through the next 3 years. I graduated in 43 then. So we have this family history of Linfield. Also, and I never can figure this lineage for sure, but I think he was my great uncle, was one of the founders of Linfield, R.C. Hill, Dr. R.C. Hill. And the Dr. R.C. Hill scholarships are active right now at Linfield. So I do have a family history that goes back farther than I do.
Did you ever consider going anywhere else, or was it always going to be Linfield?
There wasn't a real choice. I had to go where I could get paid for. And at that point, the college thought that I should not have work outside of the campus because of the privilege of the scholarship that I was on. And so I did not have any kind of job off campus. And that was fine. It was, college at that time was very academic, and Linfield wasn't all that social because it was it was a religious college. It had very religious Baptist foundations. There was no dancing on the campus. There was no card playing on the campus, and except the guys did it all the time. But there was, and of course, no smoking. Well, not many people smoked anyway at that time, so that wasn't any hardship. And there wasn't any dancing on the campus. So we sororities, when we would have a dance, or the fraternities, we would hold it downtown McMinnville, and the Chamber of Commerce had a building with an upstairs, and it was like a big open space, gymnasium-type space. So we would connect with the Chamber of Commerce, and we had the Groening brothers, and one of them is what is it, the cartoon that's on?
The Simpsons.
The Simpsons, yes, the Simpsons, yeah. And Homer and his brother would take turns because they had a pile of 78 RPM records that were very danceable. And they had the big phonograph player, and they had a sound system so that they could announce the next couples of music. And it was just it was very primitive, but it was fun. But we would drag in our formals, we would drag our bodies down the street to the Chamber of Commerce building upstairs, and then, of course, we had closure of the dorm at, I think it was 11 o'clock at that time. So we all had to drag ourselves down and back to the homestead, and that was that was our social life. Actually, there wasn't much else, and there weren't big programs being brought to the campus. I mean, we were pretty self-sustained, and it was, like I say, it was maybe primitive, but it was so broad. And believe me, I have loved, and I'm going to refer to it a little later on, I have loved how the education that I got at Linfield took me so many different directions. It was shallow, but it was broad. And my goodness, wait till you see what I've done over my lifetime. I have a bad name for it. The Shameless Done List. And I think it has like 20 different things, avocations or vocations that I have earned a living doing. But this was my experience at Linfield, because it was the only place that was ready for me. And I was only barely 16 when I graduated from high school. So that year out of school, for my brother earned enough to underwrite me, that served well. It gave me a little year of maturity. So I was 17 when I started Linfield. That's awfully naive and innocent and young. Dreadfully so in those times.
Do you remember your first impressions of the campus, or early impressions of the campus and the people?
Just beautiful. It has always been as it is now. It hasn't changed that much. The original campus area, including Pioneer Hall and the old oak tree, which has met a terrible demise a few years ago because of its age. That was to be respected and revered, and it was. And there was a bench underneath it, and people who went and sat on the bench did so with respect. And, you know, those kinds of things are kind of snickered at nowadays. But it was, I learned what to respect and how to respect traditions. And I think that was one of my basic lessons that I got from Linfield. And you know, basically that is a very calming thing to do, to learn, is to just sit and meditate or enjoy. Do nothing with your mind, but just take it in, enjoy. And that was pretty much our feeling. We were very careful with the dormitories. We were always very careful with our rooms, and never were there any scuffles or any, except funny things that went on, you know, and the guys were pretty good at that. But we just were always respectful about our surroundings and the faculty and the people that were administering to us. We were very respectful of them, even though some of them were kooks, or some of them were so old that they were ready to fall over, like Dr. Orr. He was just an absolute institution. He had been on the faculty for like 55 or 60 years at that point, and he stayed on all the 4 years I was there. But he was quick of mind still, and had a brilliant history in his field. So, you know, we learned to respect that too. Made fun of him, and we would do skits on Fridays, well, we had to go to chapel Monday through Thursday, and that was where another sidebar comes in. But the Fridays were the student body days, and the student body president always made sure that 2 or 3 of the guys who were the village clowns would get up and do a skit. And it was just a day we all looked forward to. And like people now look forward to wearing jeans on Friday, not having to dress up kind of thing. But we were programmed the way we were. What I started to say about that Friday, or that institution that someone, and I don't know who started it, may have been the DOT's Daughters of Tradition, made a huge blue field of the United States flag, and they had white stars on it, and it was hung over, and that's all it was the blue field, and it hung over the proscenium arch in Melrose Hall, where we all went for chapel. And it was very, very moving because the class of 42 was getting just decimated in the South Pacific at that point. In fact, the United States was losing the war to the Japanese because they had been so prepared, so dug in for years ahead because they knew what they wanted. They wanted the whole Pacific Ocean and all of its islands, and they wanted the Aleutian chain, and they wanted the west coast of the United States. And that's what their goal was, and they were had prepared for 6 years. We came into the war because of Pearl Harbor and because they tried to take out our Navy in one shot, and they did a really good job of almost doing that. They came on in such preparedness, and we came on in such unpreparedness, just garnering everything we could to get people trained. We had 90-day wonders. That was the pilot training program. And the guys would leave our campus. If they were 18 or older, they were qualified to become a pilot. And they would leave our campus and be gone for 30 days, or 90 days, and they would come back in uniform with their wings. And they would go out to fight and do whatever was necessary, which is also where I come in with my air traffic tower control when I got in the Navy. But anyway, the campus was down as far as men go. They left because they all felt compelled to participate, to help. And that was the same thing happened to me when I got to teaching. I went to Myrtle Point to teach the first year after I graduated. I got 2 contracts in the mail, one from John Day and one from Myrtle Point. And interestingly, I had not prepared to be a teacher. I had just taken the whole chihuahua, the whole affair of a broad education, not any education classes. I didn't get distressed by anything I should or shouldn't do. And when I was getting educated, but I had 2 contracts. One was for $1,550 for the year. That was Myrtle Point. And John Day offered $1,800 for the year. That's 9 months. And I looked at those and I went to my dad and I said, "Where's Myrtle Point?" And he says, "Well, it's just down the coast here a little ways." So we were in Lincoln City. And I said, "Well, where's John Day?" And he says, "That's way across Oregon over the other side of the state." I said, "I don't want either one of them, but I'll take Myrtle Point because I feel bad that they need teachers so badly." So that's how I got to Myrtle Point. And I found that what was happening there was the same thing that was happening on the campus. My one and only year there, I felt like I was a failure because I could not seem, I was teaching 4 years of English, journalism, drama, And what else? Anyway, all in 5 hours, 5 periods. And I couldn't get to the boys. I just somehow, they would just sit there. They were vacant. Well, about mid-year, I went to the principal and I said, "What is it? Am I that much of a waste?" And he said, "No, Peggy, you've got to realize these boys that are sitting in this classroom have lost brothers. They have lost fathers. They have lost uncles that have been killed, and they're aware that they're going next. They're next." And I said, "Well, I never even thought of that they're next." And that was why they were turned off. They just didn't care. And they wouldn't do assignments. They wouldn't participate in class. They were just there. And I felt so much better after that. I didn't feel like it was my fault. But it was the same thing that was going on at Linfield on the campus. The guys were putting in time until they could get where they wanted to go. And most of them had enough education by that time. They had 3 years of college, so they were good for officers. And they would go to OCS, or they would go to pilot training. And when it came to graduation day, there were, and I can't remember, I've thought and thought, I can't remember how many, but I think there were 5 guys that came back to get their diplomas in uniform and walked across the stage and then went off to the South Pacific. And every one of them went to the South Pacific because there was need at every stage, every level. And they weren't all pilots, but they needed management, administrative. They need officers at every level. Yeah. Go ahead.
And so you were also drawn into the war effort after teaching at Myrtle Point. So tell us how that came about, how you became part of the military.
Well, I sat there and watched those gold stars go up there on that flag. And the class of 42, like I said earlier, was very, very decimated. It seemed like every other week there would be another gold star up there. And some of them were guys that sat beside me in chapel the year before. I knew every one of them. Campus was small enough that we all, when we got to be juniors or seniors, we knew everybody. And there was a campus tradition. You always said hello. And that was just the byword when you passed somebody, hello. And that was the campus tradition. Well, you got to know people that way, and even the freshmen or the lower classmen. But anyway, I had this, it was just very touching to me. Sometimes I'd choke up, and I wouldn't even hear what was going on in chapel because somebody's name was up there. And to this day, it touches me because I remember that as being such a moving experience for my age. I was, 20 or 21 at that point. And this was serious business. This was life and death. And so I moved through that time with some kind of a feeling that I needed to do something. Well, I went and did that year of teaching when I felt like I was doing nothing, that I was kind of wasting myself. And the Navy recruiter would come to where I was eating every lunchtime. He'd come once a month, and he caught me, and he would sit across the room from me, and I would eat at the hotel downtown Myrtle Point, and he watched me. And month after month, he never said anything. He never came and put any pressure on or anything. Finally, I went over and I sat down beside him, and it was it's probably April. And I said, I don't know that I want to come back and teach again another year. And he says, oh, good, let me tell you. And so he gave me his spiel, which included, of course, curtains on the windows and white tablecloths and silverware and dining tables and so forth, because he knew I was college degreed and I was qualified for Officers Training School, OCS. Well, that isn't the way it worked out. But anyway, it was so fascinating to me what he was telling me. And I said, well, what would I be doing? And he said, it depends on how you test, because the Navy's going to give you a battery of tests and find out where your interests and your talents are, and then they'll place you. And I said, well, that's scary. I might have to learn something new. But it worked out that way, and it was just wonderful. It was one time when what I thought was going to happen to me was absolutely the opposite of what did happen.
So what did happen once you...
What did happen was that I went in for my not indoctrination, but my sign-up in Portland. They gave me the wrong test. After a full day of testing and physical examination and the whole 9 yards, and I went up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, put the paper down on the desk, and they said, holy cow, you really creamed this one, but it's the wrong test. We should have given you the officer's test. Come back tomorrow. Okay, I lived 50 miles away. I lived in the coast, and this was in Portland. I had a round-trip Greyhound ticket that I'd paid $2 for. I had one side left to get home on. I had in my pocket a 50-cent piece. And I looked and I thought, okay, 25 cents for a room overnight at the YWCA, 25 cents for breakfast tomorrow morning. I can afford that, but I don't know that I want to do it. So like a hollow head, I just said, no, let it go. Well, then I went in and enlisted. But the end of the story is pretty gorgeous, because what I ended up with was being trained in control tower air traffic management, which is the elite of the enlisted. And no officer could ever be in the control tower. We were giving orders to officers, and they had to do what we told them to do. As you know, nowadays you're getting a full exposure to this. Air traffic controllers are responsible. Their air traffic controllers are responsible for any plane crash, because it's what they say that has to be minded, and they're the ones that have to take the fall for it. And it's still the same way. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I didn't know all that at the time, and I just thought, oh no, we'll just go in and enlist it. So I had quite an experience learning, and I got into a whole new world that I never would have anticipated. And the wonderful part of getting into that world was that I went through a 6-week school in Atlanta, Georgia, in which I had to learn. We were studying like I've never studied before. 30 minutes of lecture, 15 minutes of testing, 15 minutes of break, and then 30 minutes of lecture, 15 minutes of, a 15-minute test over that same material. And I got so that I would spend my lunch hour, instead of eating, they gave us I think it was a 1-hour break. I would go sit down in a corner, literally squat down in a corner with my notes in front of me, because I was so dead serious about getting through that course. I had to get a 70 or above. We had to graduate with 70 or above. We had to take a 200-question CAA test a 200-question FCC test and graduate with, come on with a score of 70 or better. Yeah, it was nothing like Linfield. But it was I was young and I was capable, and I just did it. And then we got our choice of where to go, choice of billets according to how we scored. I think there were 5 women in the class, 5 out of 1,680 that were chosen for this class. And I think I was number 3. The first 2 had their own pilot's license. These ladies already knew the score all the way around, which put the rest of us at a bit of a disadvantage. But I did make it, and I got my choice of billets. Well, the fun thing about that was that the billets were Great Lakes or Waco, Texas, or all kinds of eastern places, Groton, Connecticut, where they built submarines, and they had Klamath Falls there. Well, nobody knew where Klamath Falls. In fact, half of them didn't know where Oregon was. If you'd ask them it's Oregon, Washington, and California, and I was so shocked at their ignorance. But anyway, I got back home. I got back to my home state, which was really a cool thing. And that was how I wound up. And really it was a deliverance, because had I gone to some great big place, I probably would have gotten lost. I might not have had the incentives or the pure pleasure from serving that I had with getting back home.
Once you got to Klamath Falls, take me through what a typical day, week, month looked like for you. What were you doing as your job?
Nothing at Klamath Falls. It was December 25th that I had to check in. Happy Christmas. And when I did check in, I went up into the tower, and everybody was sitting there playing cards, and it was just absolutely dull normal. And I said, well, what's the issue here? I have been trained, for some pretty good activity. And they said, and they just looked at me and said, we're frozen in. And I looked out on the tarmac, and sure enough, those planes had about 6 inches of ice sticking their wheels to the ground. No getting anybody up in the air at all. And I said, how long does this last? And they said, through the month of December and maybe January and sometimes into February. And Olean Pass out there, nobody can get up into that because it's way below zero, and the planes have to be cared for. The engines at that time had to be modified for the altitude plus the cold. And we just don't do that here. Besides, how many fighter planes are going to be used in Klamath Falls? That's a little far from the coastline. But anyway, 2 months later, an opening came at Astoria. And I looked around and I said, anybody want that? No, we like it the way it is, And so I took it, and I was so pleased because the rest of my time was active. And I did have a life, a life after Klamath Falls.
And what did that look like for you then? What was your kind of schedule like? What were you responsible for?
In Astoria. There were probably 15 or so of us control tower operators, and to begin with, it was off limits for officers so that we had no one over us. Our first class was in charge, and occasionally a warrant officer would come up, but he was a line warrant, so we didn't have to listen to him either. But it was 15 on and 15 off. And we would have 15 days of duty, and then we would be off for 15. And the duty would change, the shift would change within the 15 days, so that you'd do, I don't remember how many nights, you'd do how many days, and then you would do that many evenings, and then you would do that many nights. And that was when I really got some experience, and I had some experiences that were very, very interesting. I don't know if you're interested in knowing about what went on up in the tower. I have written this book about my 2 years in the military. Never salute with a broken garter. World War II with an Oregon wave. Real life on Oregon coast home front, followed by uniformed life in three corners of the United States. I had a variety of experiences with learning. We had one experience. The tower was never. Oh, first of all, let me explain. There was no such thing as radar in those days. There was a metal post which was up over the tower, and that delivered a signal. And the signal was like this. It was an X. And this is where we got the old saying, "Are you on the beam?" Because the beam would give our numbers, our code was NKE, and it delivered it 24/7 continuously. Dit, da-dot, dit, da-dot, dit, or whatever it was. I don't remember the Morse code anymore. I didn't remember it even then. But we got, the pilot would be coming in on our coordinates, and that we gave him over the air, and then he would find, when he got closer to the beam, it would get louder. Our code would get louder, and when he hit the beam, then he was on it. He knew that he was right on course for our airport. Well, we had control over a 10-mile area in the control tower. When you got, as a pilot, and I don't care who you were, you could have been a general or an admiral. You wouldn't have been a general probably, but an admiral flying this little plane, and you got to the 10-mile limit, you were mine. You were all mine, and I'm enlisted third class, but you do what I tell you to do. And that was the fun thing that we had, that little private joke that we had among us in the tower. But there were, and we were never to talk to the ground. The tower could never communicate with the ground. We were only air-to-air communication. Well, we got a call one time from Tillamook, Naval Air Station Tillamook, and it was really weak. And it came in, and it never got any louder. It just came in so weak, and it was kind of broken. And we listened so carefully because it was a mayday. And we couldn't, you don't get a mayday from the ground. And we listened carefully. Well, it turned out that we got a duty officer up in the tower with us at that time, and because we had to have decisions made by someone up above us. It was Tillamook. The city of Tillamook was surrounded with forest fire. They had been cut off. The railroad was cut off. The highways in and out were cut off. The train, the railroad everything was cut off. They had no way of getting help. So they were calling us to call Portland to send fire help down to Tillamook. Well, that was kind of a unique experience. And then I had, I used to spend my extra time down in operations office because all of the old log books were down on shelves down there in the back room. And when I'd go off duty, maybe I didn't want to go back to barracks, and we lived across town. We lived at Port of Astoria. We were at the airport for duty, but we were back over across town for our barracks. And so if I didn't want to go back to the barracks, I would go to the log room and read those. And those log books contained all of the information about the aircrafts that had gone down. And there were so many occasions on which, the fog would come in, just like on Silent Cat's feet. The fog would come in instantly. The field could be shut off. And if you're out to sea and you're coming in, you're following the fog in. And those, like I say, didn't have radar. We didn't have all the VF or the CFR equipment that they have now. And so pilots would get lost. They would try to set down on a hole or go down through a hole. The bottom of the ocean, it was at that time accredited with having a graveyard of aircraft, probably including the pilots, off Seaside and Cannon Beach. And no effort was ever made for rescue. We didn't have the time. We didn't have the equipment. We didn't want to. Nobody was going out to sea to do underwater scrutiny at that point. We were fighting a war above water. I learned a lot about the topography. There was a plane that went down, and I watched him go down, and I told about it in the book. An SB-2C, which is called a tank, and it was also had another nasty name, son of a bitch, second class. And the pilots hated that plane because it was like a truck. It was like a tank. It was not really maneuverable. It was a plane which you had to get used to, and you wouldn't trade off. Once you got used to the SB-2C, you stayed with it if you could. And we've got some wonderful tactical stories about guys that only flew SB-2Cs and were very, very successful. But anyway, this one, unfortunately, this young pilot, ensign, had made a bet the night before in a bar that he could pull an SB-2C out of a flat spin. Well, a flat spin is when you're just going around in a circle like this, and you go lower and lower, and then to pull up, you have to know how to do it. And he had made this bet that he could pull it out of a flat spin, and it was his plane. So the next day, we got this air traffic permission from the officer on duty down in operations to let this guy go up. He was going up on a surveillance flight, and the officer didn't have a clue. But we up in the tower knew, grapevine worked among the enlisted, and we knew what was about to happen. And first class was on duty, and he said, "We don't want this guy off the ground." And he called down to operations, and he said, "Check that flight plan again, and we can't tell him no. We didn't have that prerogative." And so away the guy gets. He takes off, and he goes off, and he gets off over to the horizon, and this is like a Sunday afternoon in March. And the weather's beautiful, and the visibility is perfect, and he gets up to, 5, 8, 10,000 feet. And he starts playing with it, and we watched him, and he was small in the distance, but we watched him rotate, and we stood there and we said, no, this can't really be happening. Sure enough, he went down below the horizon and took himself and another enlisted flight crew person with him. And so we called operations the minute that we'd seen that happen, and we told them that the plane had gone down. And they sent somebody out. We gave them the coordinates, and they sent somebody out immediately. And sure enough, it was pancaked flat. And that was something that bothered me a lot, because I had watched somebody die, not up close in color, but I had seen the activity. And I thought about it so many times, even at that age. I just thought about life and how careless some people are with it. Not me. But that was one of the events that went on. There were lots of things that happened in the tower that I felt that I grew up. And I made my mistakes. I made my dumb mistakes. And I really got conditioned to not wanting to be on duty with the first class, because he hated women. He hated having women in the tower. This was not the Navy, It wasn't right. They ought to stay home and bake cookies. But it was the way it was.
So I'd like to back up a little bit and talk a little bit more about Linfield before we talk about your post-Navy life as well, and all of your many accomplishments here. I'm curious, when you attended school, what did you study? What was your focus and your major?
I didn't really have a focus. I couldn't find a direction. I was just too young, and too I guess unproven. And I wrestled once in a while, but not very often, with what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be, and nothing seemed to jump out, except I thought maybe I wanted to be a nurse. And the military offered a full nursing training, and plus you give back so many, or 2 years I think it was at the time, and they paid everything, and you came out an RN. And I looked at that when I was a senior, but it still didn't excite me. I tried to take a biology class, and I thought that I was going to have to maintain a mouse, and that didn't seem like that was going to be very fun. So I guess I just took classes that, Professor Mahaffey was my counselor, and he had my brother Howard right ahead of me, and Howard had been very successful in drama, and one of his favorites. And so he put me into speech and drama. Well, I didn't like drama, but I did like speech. So, yeah, he got me going on that pretty well, and that was part of my double major, double minor. I had a double major in speech and English and a double minor in journalism and drama when I came out. But see, that's liberal arts, and it's not very deep. It's just the surface. But I loved all of those. I loved the literature, and we had wonderful professors. They were all human beings. They were in it for the love of teaching, and they were calm and collected and goal-oriented. They knew what they wanted their students to get, and it was an excellent education. Can't fault it a bit. It was just so thin.
And so you were a student at Linfield when the Pearl Harbor attacks happened. What do you remember about that and sort of the immediate aftermath of the event?
Do you know, there weren't very many young people that knew where Pearl Harbor was, and it didn't frighten us, and it didn't impress us, because we just didn't have immediate grasp of what was going on. Our news came to us, but very few of us ever listened to the news at that age. Came to us over the radio, and that was and newspapers. But newspapers were maybe every day like the Oregonian, Portland was every day, and the Journal was every day in the evening. But not a lot of us did pay attention to what was going on in the world. We were in our little bubble. And it was pretty much, I don't think that it was a selfish bubble. It was just the fact that we were not exposed. Yeah, we were very protected. Linfield was religious, and Linfield was careful about what came into the campus. And so it was different times, and like I say, it was sheltered. And I think that was the reason that I didn't pay that much attention to Pearl Harbor. When I found out that it was a world event, then, yeah, like the rest of them, and up goes this flag in the chapel, and then everything starts coming to life. But see, that was my senior year. So, and then we started selling bonds, and we were selling stamps, and we were having contests. There was a bond queen once a month, whoever could sell the most bonds. And we were made aware of that kind of thing, but we didn't have contacts off campus. I just had my family back home who couldn't afford to support me with buying bonds. But those bonds were something else. They matured in 10 years, I think it was, at something like double or triple what you'd put into them. They were really a good investment, and it was good for the government because the government got all this money, which they needed desperately. So, yeah, we were conscious of what was going on pretty much after everything was explained to us.
What started to change on campus after Pearl Harbor?
Oh, probably the awareness, just the fact that we got serious. We got aware of the fact that, like a lot of seniors, finally realize, oh, I'm out of here next year. I'm on my own. Oh, what am I going to do? And this is not uncommon in any generation for college seniors to wake up a little late, a day late and $1 short. Yeah, I think that was the time that we all became aware was in 43. Yeah.
Do you remember any, you talked about classmates you knew who were going and fighting. I know faculty left as well. Do you remember the campus feeling smaller, feeling like it was, there was less going on? Were there activities that didn't happen anymore, or did life kind of go on?
Dances. The girls didn't dance with other girls in those times. Yeah, it was, we felt that, and there were fewer social activities. There were guys and girls that had been going steady, and the guy disappears. And so there were a lot of individual changes. There were, I don't know, there was one question here about students' impact, lack of male students, how did it impact the sports events. I don't know. I didn't pay any attention to the sports. I know we probably were missing a football team eventually. And although there were young people on the campus, young men that could fill in pretty well, basketball never slowed down. And in fact, we had one, I was able to set up a basketball game between Astoria Tower and Linfield basketball team. And yeah, we had, so there was still something going on in the basketball arena, and I think that was probably because it was less of a contact dominated sport.
Do you remember, you talked about selling bonds and stamps. Do you remember like rationing going on campus, or any other kind of changes in daily life?
No, we didn't have rationing. That was a civilian that suffered that. And my family, my mother kept all of her, I still have them, the old ration books and how the stamps were torn out as they were used, and sugar was rationed, and batteries were rationed, and you couldn't drive at night because you didn't have enough gas, and no headlights on the coastline. And so the civilian life was very different. We didn't have any shortages at all in the military. It's like it is now. We protect the military because we know we have to season them and feed them and help them to do what they have to do. So they're two different worlds.
So let's now talk about the rest. So after your naval experiences and after World War II, your many accomplishments. Let's talk about that. So what's on your list?
I don't know that there are any accomplishments as such, but I have this Shameless Done List of all the things that I have done. And let us say that it started with my being a waitress at a restaurant when I was 14 years old. I worked for 2 years for this restaurant at 27 cents an hour. And when we got a quarter as a tip, that was good money. And I know that there was a girl a little bit older than I in my town that worked at the same place, and she one time got $1 on the table. And times are so different. But village on-call babysitter, house cleaner, secondary teacher, language arts, journalism, high school girls counselor, post office clerk, newspaper reporter, air traffic control tower operator, U of O alumni office secretary, Saunders Flying School secretary, that was in Missouri, VA attorney pool secretary, credit office manager, McKenzie Willamette Hospital for 4 years. I was their first employee. Oregon adult education instructor, night classes, toll painting instructor, Kenai Community College coordinator in Alaska, writer-director, high school alternative ed program in Alaska, owner Wicker Basket consignment shop in Sisters, on-call help for 4 businesses, managing partner of the Hen's Tooth, that was Sisters, church secretary, part-time, deli queen, Hoodoo Ski Bowl for 2 seasons, 2 winters, curriculum writer, Springfield Public Schools, 2 summers, writer-director, high school work program, Sisters, activity director, 350 space RV resort for 3 winters, real estate office assistant. Now, after I turned 80, I was a proofreader for the Central Oregon newspaper for 5.5 years. In fact, I worked at that until the day before I moved here. Proofreader, nonprofit, A Gift of Time. Founder and facilitator, Family Caregiver Support Group, 7 years. Founder, facilitator, Military Women of Yamhill County, 3 years. Author of 4 books. So
that's a lot.
I've been busy. Kept me out of trouble. But these are the 4 books, and one I've already showed you. Plus this one, which is a collection that I made by networking across the United States. 16 women's stories. All of them were in World War II in the 4 branches of the military, and they've told their stories in their own words. There is only one still alive. So I'm proud to say that I have preserved 15 stories. And this one, I'm too tired to cut the rhubarb, is my caregiver support group. It's my own story of caregiving my husband for his final journey. Inside a caregiver's head as she walks her husband's final journey with him. And it is the story of our last 8 months. And he passed at home, so I was his only caregiver. So I got fairly indoctrinated in caregiving, which I never thought about that I would do. And this is my latest one that I just came out with this summer, Between Sunset and Sunrise. And it is the family caregiver shift from service to self. And it's how the caregiver struggles with that turn-off of the passing of the person who they're taking care of, and how they get back their own life, because a caregiver loses their life in caregiving if it's a family relative, usually. I love to write, as you can tell.
I assume there's a healing process that goes on with the writing of
Oh,
it, too.
yeah. And I have a web page with a lot of blogs and stories. I do a lot of short stuff. I love Dave Barry and his humor, and I loved Andy Rooney and his cryptic, sardonic, sarcastic pickup on minutiae and how he could make it into a big, big event. And so I kind of tried to copy both of them, unsuccessfully probably, but I do a lot of short writing, and I do some stuff on like the president and current situations, and it's just to make fun of it. It's just to pick up on something that's so goofy that it's unbelievable, and yeah, that's where I'm at now.
At least you're not bored.
Oh, no, I'm never bored. In fact, I've got so much on my plate. I was just telling my daughter the other day, I got so many irons in the fire. I don't know which one to pull out first. But at my age, I better pull them. I better get busy pulling anyway, or they're not going to get finished.
Do you guys have anything to add? Anything to ask?
I think we could end with Kevin's question.
Oh,
Yesterday.
the first thing you think of?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Peggy, and answer this to Rich so that you're looking in the same direction. But what, when you think of Linfield, what's the first thing you think of?
When I think about Linfield, I guess I just think about the calmness and the spirit, the sweetness, because everything was beautiful before the war. It got tarnished with the war and all the things that the war did to Linfield and its young people. No, I have nothing but good memories and appreciation for my education. That's my whole thing. This is what a liberal arts education can do for you. Look at all the crazy stuff I've done. And I had to do it by my bootstraps. In other words, I'd take on something and I would have to learn how to do it. But I had enough background that I could write or I could do whatever was required. Anything except science, and I'm dull normal on that. I can't do anything scientific or mathematical, but I'm pretty good with words.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your stories and for sharing your life with us, and we'll go ahead and stop.
Oh, yes. It's my pleasure, absolutely. I'm shameless.
And we appreciate that. It makes our job a lot easier.